Hello and welcome to That Shooting Show. My name is Steve Anderson. I am your humble host. We have got a doozy of a broadcast for you here today, and I want to get to it right away. But first, we got to thank our partners. You know them, you love them, scream them at the radio along with me. Walther Firearms is the title sponsor of the podcast and of AndersonShooting.com. And once again, they are the only folks in the industry with a Hyundai P guarantee. If you buy a competition appropriate Walther firearm and do not find it to your liking, you can return it to them and they will give you your money back. It is the only one in the industry. And if you're looking for a new carry optics or production type gun, heck, even limited optics, if you want to if you want to rock the Magwell, that's fine too. I'm not going to tell you it's the best one for all of these. Well, I think it is. But I will tell you it deserves a look. That's all I'm going to tell you. It deserves a look. And if you've got small hands, the F Series is phenomenal for those with smaller hands. And again, the money back guarantee makes it completely risky free. And of course, Targets USA, as you know, manufactures the finest steel targetry on the planet. CR Speed makes the finest gun handling gear you can gadgetry gear. The finest gun handling gadgetry you can or wrap around your waist or anywhere else. And Jay Beal has just well, he not today. He will be soon taking delivery of a Walther specific race holster. So if you think Jay was fast before, wait till you see his speed with a CR speed race holster. You'll be able to see his speed with a CR speed. It'll be interesting to see if he gets any quicker out of a CR speed race holster. I'm sure we'll get videos on that as soon as he gets that thing. It only took me 6 months to send it to him. I think that's pretty reasonable. And of course, the AMG-Lab.com Commanderson timer continues to turn heads and blow minds by putting the time right into the tablet. You can see every glorious event, and if your match director uses them, you can pull up a guy who's a few seconds ahead of you. You can compare all of your gunfire events to all of his gunfire events. And if you remember the stage, hopefully you remember the stage, then you'll be able to say, okay, he got from here to here in 1.8, I got there in 2:12. He transitioned over here in 0.3, I transitioned over here in 0.7. And you can figure out where that time is instead of just trying to run faster and shoot faster. Of course, you know Hunter's HD Gold is the only eyewear that I wear, and you can see that I are wearing it right now like I always do. And of course, Shooting Sports Innovations is a lot to type because there's a lot to see once you get there. And Outdoor Dynamics continues to remanufacture the finest competition ammunition you can dispense from your Freedom Seed dispenser. Please check out upcoming classes. We have two mental management dates currently set for December. One is I believe it's a 1 p.m. Eastern start time, and one is a 6 p.m. Eastern start time. They're both 3 days in a row. Go to upcoming classes and check that out. You can also see the live fire classes we've got booked for 2024. And by the way, we're adding live fire classes at the rate of roughly one a week once we get the details squared away. So if we're not scheduled to be in your area, let me know where your area is, where you want to see a class, and you can get the class for free if you can arrange the range. You don't have to pay the range fees necessarily. We can look at those range fees and build those into the cost of the class. Not a big deal. Let's just get the ball rolling and say, hey, I can get us on a range. Hey, I want a free class, and we can do it. It will be awesome. So what I want to talk about today, and I banged out these notes pretty quickly. This may not be all encompassing, but it will for sure be comprehensive. Um, Probably won't have anything left out, but you just never know. I mean, I may have forgotten something. I've probably forgotten more about dry fire than most people have ever learned because I did write the book. I did write the book on dry fire, and I did invent the modern dry fire method using power trims and all the rest of it. Very proud of that. But today I want to talk about dry fire and live fire and how to use them together. Okay? So, dry fire, as I interpreted it, was all about gun handling. So what we want to do is learn to handle the gun quickly and efficiently. What a lot of you may not realize is that when I wanted to be a grandmaster, there was very little instruction available. There was YouTube. There was none of that. Internet was in its infancy at that time, and there just wasn't a lot of information out there. But I learned from the Brian Enos forums that I can use the par time function on a shot timer to measure anything in dry fire. So that's what I did. I started measuring everything in dry fire using par times. The obvious application are your draws, hands at sides, wrists above. I wrote WAS, but that's not it. Wrists above shoulders. Okay, so hands at sides, wrist below belt. Next is wrists above shoulders, and of course the turn and draw. These are the common draw start positions. How long does it take you to get the gun out and into action? Well, the draw is not that important. Well, the shorter the stage, the more important the draw is, and on a classifier, the draws are extremely important. If you're in Steel Challenge, the draw is, oh gosh, at the upper level, it's going to be 10% of your time to get the gun out of the holster, maybe something like that. Maybe more than that, actually. Significantly more, actually, at the very upper level. But you need to be good at that. And perhaps more importantly, you need to be able to get the gun out of the holster and onto the target as quickly as possible and as accurately as possible. The first 6 or 7 drills in refinement repetition are all presentation drills. You're going to draw to an acceptable sight picture without pressing the trigger. I believe you should have your finger on the trigger for numerous reasons, but we don't want to press the trigger. We don't want to drop the hammer or the striker, because when you're using par times, we want to put a par time on the acceptable sight picture, not necessarily the shot. And that's because it's way too easy to beat the par time by honking the trigger to get your 0.8 or your 0.7 or your 0.6. It's way too easy to hit that trigger without having an acceptable sight picture. We don't want you to speed up an unacceptable sight picture. We want you to speed up an acceptable sight picture. Also, table starts, any kind of gun pickup, gun on barrel. These are all things that can be done in dry fire with par times. Unloaded starts, gun on table unloaded, gun in holster unloaded. How long does it take you to do that? These are things you need to know. These are things you can improve. Now, curiously, I personally never dry fired those for a couple of reasons. Number one, back then we didn't see a lot of them. Gun pickups were pretty rare. And anytime I saw a gun pickup, I just turned it into a draw. I said, oh, this is just a different draw, and I'm great at that. And I never even thought about it. So that's a really good strategy for anything that's unusual in a stage. It will only bother you to the extent that you let it bother you. If they put you in a canoe, if they put you in a golf cart, they put you on a shaky bridge or some sort of bungee contraption, just ignore it to the best you can. Those things are there. They're there to distract you from good shooting. Don't let them do that. Okay. And of course, strong hand only and weak hand only. If you're one of these shooters who has a hard time finding the dot one-handed, when I hear somebody say, oh, it takes me forever to fire the dot, well, I translate that in my head very quickly, and the translation is, I don't ever dry fire one-handed. That's the immediate translation that I translate to. So strong hand only, weak hand only, right? On those two in particular, you'll want the gun hand out in front. For strong hand, that'll be a reversal of your normal stance. For support hand, it should be the same stance. But you're speeding up your acceptable sight picture and your dot acquisition. Reloads can also be done in dry fire. Obviously, you'll want to start with the Burkett reload and refinement repetition, because that particular drill forces you to define success as seeing the magazine touch the magwell. You can do a successful reload without seeing the magwell with a pistol. However, your success rate will be less than 100. But if you see the magwell every single time, if the angles are the same, and your index finger is high and short on the magazine, your success rate will be 100. And that's just all there is to it. Skip one of those, and your success rate will be less than 100. But anytime you're working with dry fire, reducing the par times is the key to getting fast. If you look at anybody in the last 10 years that has gotten really, really fast, I promise you that dry fire is a huge part of that equation. I promise you. And with respect to refinement repetition, I want you to do the first 12 drills for 3 to 5 minutes at or below your current par time. I know the book says do 10 over here and 10 over there, 10 like this, 10 like that. I want you to cross that out and do 3 to 5 minutes at or below your current par time. And that's all there is to it. And we'll come back to that in a minute. So the other thing you can do in dry fire is work on accuracy. You can do group shooting in dry fire. Group shooting is easier in dry fire, and it's probably where dry fire was invented. You know, back in the 40s or 50s or whenever, they used to put up a coin on the front sight. Well, drop the hammer without dislodging the coin. I've heard people talk about putting brass on the end of the barrel. Same thing, you're trying to fire the gun without disturbing it. That is what produces accuracy. Freestyle, strong hand only, weak hand only. I've never used the coin or the brass or anything like that. I just did something crazy. I mean, this is really revolutionary. Think about this for a second. This is groundbreaking. I literally would aim the gun and press the trigger and monitor for sight movement as the hammer or striker fell. That's it. That's all you need to do. That's group shooting in dry fire. Steel is perhaps the most realistic dry fire you can do because there's no split to worry about. We'll come back to splits in a minute. There's no split to worry about, and you are the only one that can know if that shot was acceptable. And if you're sitting there wondering, how do I call my shots in dry fire? Shot calling is the easiest to do in dry fire. It's very simple. If you have an acceptable sight picture, so I'll make an acceptable sight picture here, okay? There it is. Okay, sight picture. I can't track it with the camera. I can't figure out which way to go. Let's say I have an acceptable sight picture and I press the trigger. All I need to know is notice that the sights didn't move much. Now the sights may be moving a little bit naturally in your wobble zone, but when I hit the trigger, it shouldn't go or something like that. If you see that when you touch the trigger and it deviates from the acceptable sight picture, that's shot calling in dry fire. And steel is a phenomenal environment in which to dry fire because there's no splits to worry about. The only thing you don't get to keep between live fire and dry fire is the splits. You get to keep everything else. You get to keep the draw, you get to keep the transition, you get to keep the reload. You don't get to keep the time between shots on a paper target. It's the only thing that's unrealistic about dry fire. And shot calling can be very easy to learn in dry fire because all you're doing is watching the sights move or not move as you activate the trigger. And yes, it is difficult to get outside of a revolver or a very, very early SIG that still has the click in the dry fire. Most of you have gotten those upgraded anyway. But yes, I know your trigger pulls will not be 100% realistic in multiple shot dry fire. I get it, but you're still doing good work. You are still doing good work. Now, this is where I want to introduce you to the 3 modes of practice. Anytime you're practicing, one thing is most important. If you're practicing for accuracy, dry fire or live fire, the target is more important than the timer. That's all that means. If you've got an accuracy goal, let's say you're struggling shooting alphas at 25 yards. Well, there's no point in timing that until you can do it, if that's your stated goal. What does it look like and feel like to shoot alphas at 25 yards? You need to know that. And the timer is not going to help you learn that. Well, I got to do it fast. Well, that's fine. But let's do it before we worry about doing it fast. In speed mode, the timer is more important than the target. You're telling me I can just miss and it don't matter. Sometimes, yes, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. All speed mode means is the timer is more important than the target. Okay? In match mode, your goal is to replicate a match environment by leaving only acceptable shots without the conscious control of speed. Guys, I am convinced that the conscious control of speed is the biggest mental error in the shooting sports. I gotta go fast. Gotta slow down to get my hits. Well, both of these will by definition activate the conscious mind to establish going this fast or going this slow, which will prevent a subconscious performance. And if you think you shoot your best when you're not thinking, what you really mean is, I shoot my best subconsciously. That distinction, I don't know if people understand that. Everybody knows they shoot their best when they're not thinking, but I don't know how many people know what that means is a subconscious performance. And the conscious control of speed, by definition, will prevent a subconscious performance. So in match mode, you're practicing leaving only acceptable shots, however you define that, without the conscious control of speed. And over time, the speed that you build up in dry fire, by learning to go faster, what it feels like and looks like to go faster, that will result in a faster match mode over time. That's all there is to it. So, when you're doing multiple shots in dry fire, you can work on transitions. There's numerous ways you can time your transitions in dry fire. Transitions is the smartest, bestest, and safest place to reduce time and increase hit factor, time between targets. You could include periods of movement in that, but you guys that are chasing splits, you are risking Charlie's, Delta's, Mike's to save 300ths of a second. That is not a good investment. Transitions, I don't know if you can hear that. The Doberman singing the song over people. I'm sure she'll get louder. You'll be able to hear it shortly. You might have heard that one. She just yawned. But transitions, you might want to consider using a metronome. I talked to Joey Sauerland about that a bunch last time I had him on the show. But if you set a metronome, okay, get a metronome going, and then set up 2 targets and force yourself to go back and forth between 2 targets at that rate. And then increase the beats per minute. Okay? You can pull the trigger, you cannot pull the trigger, that's up to you. There's benefits to both. But using a metronome to work on transitions will force you. You've got to be able to hear that. Oh, she's not happy about something. So, metronome will force you to drive that gun quicker in between 2 targets. You want to make sure your eyes are out in front of the sights so that she's singing the song of transitions up there. We may have to edit this out. Pardon me 1 second. Make small talk amongst yourselves. I apologize for the interruption. Had to make sure she wasn't trapped in the bathroom or something. Gracie the Doberman likes to work her way into the bathroom and have the door shut behind her and then cry, of course, when she's locked in the bathroom. Shot calling, once again, anytime you're doing multiple shots, is critical. And it's informational as opposed to judgmental. We're going to come back to that in a minute. Shot calling in dry fire is about information. It's not necessarily about judgment. If you're dry firing on multiple targets and you have a Delta or a Mike, it's okay as long as you know that. What's not okay, except for very, very short periods of time, is just to wave the gun around wildly to beat the part time. That can be useful to establish what it feels like to do something you've never done before, but I don't think you want to do too much of that where you just have no respect for what you're seeing at all. I wouldn't do that a lot, okay? But again, the splits in dry fire and multiple shots, multiple targets, is the only thing you don't get to keep. Now, that doesn't mean that I suggest intentionally increasing your splits. My personal opinion is that if I'm seeing what I need to see, I can split as fast as I want. And because the gun's not moving, that means I can split as fast as I want. That's just my personal opinion. That was the decision that I made. And what that means is when the visual conditions are appropriate, boy, howdy, can I shoot quick. But it does require discipline in live fire to know that if I've been dry firing the El Pres 10 yards and I've been having 16 splits, I may not get to keep those. Certainly, if I'm dry firing 11s, I probably won't get to keep those. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it in dry fire. It means you shouldn't expect to get to keep it. And I think there's a valuable thing to learn there. Again, because the visual conditions are appropriate in dry fire, because the gun's not moving in recoil, you are seeing what you need to see. Therefore, you can pull the trigger again. Okay? But when you do the comparison, just remember, you're not going to get to keep those splits. It's okay to do it in dry fire. Just don't expect to do it in live fire. Now, something very close like the Can You Count classifier, you're probably going to get to keep those. For sure in open, for sure in PCC, probably in carry optics, and probably in production. Targets are 6 and 10 feet away. You might get to keep those splits. Okay, but again, in dry fire, we're always wanting to reduce par times. And the reason you're doing that is you're making a new limit of human function possible. And then you're making it normal. And then when that limit of human function is higher and normalized, the only thing that limits that limit of human function is vision. That's it. You get to keep everything else. Okay? Anytime you're dry firing multiple shots on multiple targets, accuracy should be reported but not judged. And I like to tell people to report a rough percentage of alphas. I just did a dry fire tune-up with a guy, blew his mind with a couple of minor tweaks. As we started doing multiple shots on multiple targets, I say, okay, when you get done, all I want to know is the rough percentage of alphas. I don't want to know how many charlies, deltas, or mics. I want a rough percentage of alphas. He goes through first time, beats the par time, 50%. Okay, great. Let's see if we can beat the par time again with 60% alphas. That was closer to 70. Great. But if we stop and say, oh, I had a mic, well, we have two problems. We have a negative imprint, and then we have an invalidated proof of concept. Oh, that sounded fancy. Our proof of concept may have been invalidated, which means if somebody says, oh, I'm getting faster, but I had a mic, they might think, ooh, I can't go faster. What you need to do is learn how to get faster without a mic. And it might take a little while. It might take a week or two. It may not happen in one day. But if you want to get fast and you want to get fast quick, this is the way to do it. And any of the multiple shot drills, we'll use El Pres as the example. All you have to do is break down every single event in that exercise and pick one thing to do sooner. In the El Pres, for example, you've got reaction time. You've got beginning to turn. You've got hand of the gun. You've got gun out of the holster. You've got gun on target. You've got the first shot. You've got the split. You've got the transition. You've got the other shot. You've got the transition. You've got the next shot. Then you've got going for the mag. Can you get your support hand off the mag a little sooner? Can you get the mag to the gun a little sooner? If you pick one of these events at a time for any multiple shot drill, you can pick up 1/10 of a second on virtually every event. But you got to focus on one event at a time instead of just trying to throw speed at it. If you try to throw speed at it, you're going to get tense, you're going to make more mistakes, and it's not going to be as productive. So think about doing things sooner as opposed to just throwing speed at it. All right, next page. So excited. Now, one of the biggest questions I get is, how can I improve my movement in dry fire? Very, very simple. Any movement, any kind of movement, any specific movement, whatever it is, that can be replicated and set up exactly the same can be improved by reducing par times. Let's say you want to shoot a piece of steel, retreat 12 feet, shoot a piece of steel. Fine. Set that up in such a way that it can be done the exact same way every day. Put a par time on it. Okay, it's taking me 3 seconds. Set your timer at 2.9. What do I got to do to save 1/10 of a second? Can I pick up a foot? Can I stand a different way? So what can I do to save 1/10 of a second? Bam, 2.9. Okay, now go to 2.8. Could I keep the gun a little higher? Could I keep the target in my peripheral vision? What could I do to save 1/10 of a second? And you can use vision barriers or boxes to replicate movement. I think boxes are a little bit better because they can't be cheated. If you set up a vision barrier, you can cheat that a little bit, right? You can stand in such a way a little further back or off to one side or something like that that cheats the start position a little bit. That's fine as an isolated exercise, but if we're working on par times, I like positions that can't be cheated. Therefore, boxes or fault lines are a little bit better. And think about, what are the most typical movement scenarios in your sport? If you're an IDPA shooter, what period of movement is most typical for my sport? Is it 6 foot lateral? Is it 6 foot forward? What's the most common movement I need to work on? Set that sucker up in dry fire in a way that you can't cheat it, and start chipping away at the par time. I like to use steel for movement exercises in dry fire and live fire because there's no splits and the accuracy is pass or fail. If you do movement on paper, you have to consider, okay, I picked up a half second, but I shot a delta. That's not necessarily bad. That could be fine, right? If I picked up a half second and fired a delta, I'd be overjoyed. Most of you would not. Most of you would say, well, saved a half second, but, and the word but really stinks, guys, but I shot a delta. If you use steel, you don't have to worry about that. Your accuracy is pass or fail. And the other great thing about using steel for movement drills in dry fire and live fire is you tend to learn instant makeups. If you hit the trigger, drop the hammer, drop the striker, and there was no steel behind that sucker, that's a miss. If you activate the trigger, striker hammer falls, and the sight stay on target, that's a hit. That's phenomenal shot calling. And the other thing you can do is you can bring movement examples in from your matches. I remember when I was in Georgia, I had to run to a port and shoot a 12-yard popper. I missed my first shot on the popper. So I set that up in live fire. I duplicated the exact same scenario. I believe it was like 15 feet of lateral movement and then a popper in a window. I set it up. I did it 100 times. I did it till I couldn't miss. And somebody at that, I had a rough time in Georgia. Some of you may know about that, but one of the people I was hanging out with that wasn't particularly kind to me said to me, "You have got the best work ethic I have ever seen." All I did was take something that gave me trouble in the match, set it up, do it 100 times. That's all I did. Now, if we're talking about shooting while moving, which we are now, the best drill I have ever found for shooting while moving in dry fire is to hold a sight picture on something, doesn't really matter, mother-in-law, coffee cup, light switch, doesn't matter, and move in a figure eight. And hold that sight picture on that smallest target while you're moving in a figure eight. That will teach your body what it needs to do to support that acceptable sight picture while you're moving. If you have a treadmill, get on that treadmill, man. Put a plate rack up in front of that treadmill, paper plates or whatever you got, and then use the miles per hour as a par time. Hey, I can shoot the plate rack, or I can hold my sight picture at 1 mile an hour. Great, let's try 1.5. Let's try 2. Phenomenal way to practice. And then, of course, all of the drills can be done while moving. And here's how you do it: add while moving to the procedure. If we're talking about drawing to a sight picture, do that while moving. Do it in all 4 directions. Drill number 1, hands at sides, draw to acceptable sight picture. Do that while moving forward 6 feet. Your par time is a little different there. I always use the par time for the sight picture and then just finish my period of movement. So if I was moving 6 feet, I'd use my normal 0.6 par time for the sight picture, and then I'd continue moving my 6 feet to hold that sight picture while I'm moving. Same thing to the right, same thing backwards, same thing to the left. Okay? These are all easy ways to use dry fire. Now, if your match mode is weak, immature, or unreliable, which means you're fast and sloppy, that means your match mode is weak, you might consider finishing your dry fire in match mode. And I've discussed this 15 times at least. I'll do it one more time. Match mode dry fire. There are 2 ways you can do it. The first way to do it is to simply do the drill without a par time. That's fine. It's not my favorite way to do it, but that does work. The only danger in doing a lot of that is you can get slow. And I experienced that firsthand. When I got my G card, I foolishly thought, hey, this is great. I'm as fast as I ever need to get. All I got to do now is shoot points. And I quit using par times for a while. My accuracy was great, but I did get slow. And in the open division, you can't afford to be getting slow. You need to always be getting faster. So you can do that. It's an easy way to do it. It's not my favorite. My favorite thing to do is to put 10 seconds on your timer, pick out 2 targets, dry fire back and forth for 10 seconds, leaving only acceptable shots. Okay? Then put 12 seconds on your timer and add a target. Now you're dry firing 3 targets for 12 seconds with only leaving acceptable shots. You want to do this without consciously slowing down. If you don't have a makeup during this process, chances are you're either not paying attention or you've consciously slowed down. I'm not telling you should have a bunch of makeups, But I'm telling you, if you don't have any, you may not be paying attention to what you're seeing, or you may have consciously slowed down. And then just keep changing it and adding time, change it and add time all the way to 30 seconds. Don't do the same exercise in that 10 to 30 second block. And all you have to do is keep adding targets, keep changing the procedure, headshot, steal, movement, whatever you want for 30 seconds. It's a very, very great way to do match mode in dry fire. Now, how does this translate to live fire? So people get a little too worked up about the direct comparison between live fire and dry fire. I believe, and we'll come back to this in a minute, I'm sure, because I wrote it down, it doesn't really matter what the difference is as long as both are improving. And the difference between the two, I've learned, will have mostly the distance to the target will be the difference between dry fire and live fire. For example, can you count a classifier where the targets are at 6 feet and 10 feet? Should be pretty similar, if not the same. But if we're talking about a 25-yard shot, that's going to be a little different. That's going to take a little longer, and the gap between dry fire and live fire will be a little bit longer. I never worried about it as long as they were both getting better, okay? Because I knew they weren't going to be the same. But the first thing you need to do in live fire is group shooting. You need to learn to leave accurate shots by not disturbing the gun. It's as simple as that. Group shooting is the best place to learn this. Freestyle. I use a coffee cup lid. I don't have I've got a cup here. That's about the right size. You can see that. I think it's about 3 inches. Make your own jokes. If you've got something you can establish 3 inches with, you can make your own jokes. But it's roughly 3 inches is the group I look for. Freestyle, strong hand, weak hand only. Establish a distance at which you shoot a coffee cup lid, and then stretch it out. You should be able to do this every time you go to the range. And I got to tell you, with regard to live fire, shot calling is the most important skill you can have as a shooter. There is not a single skill in the entire world of practical shooting that is more important than being able to call your shots. That doesn't mean looking at the holes in the paper. That doesn't mean your sight picture before the gun went off. It doesn't mean your sight picture when you touch the trigger. It means as the gun fired, where did the dot or sight lift from? That is where the bullet went. You've got to be able to call your shots in live fire. That is the most important thing. And when you're properly engrossed in calling your shots, you will get a subconscious performance. It's truly magical. When all you're doing is watching that gun going off and monitoring those shots, you cannot think about anything else. And that is wonderful for a subconscious performance. Okay? Anytime you're having an accuracy issue, it can only be sight or trigger. And if you're having an accuracy, you have to know if it was sight or trigger. And here's how you know. If you're shooting at a steel plate and the dot is not on the steel plate when the gun went off, that's sight. If you're shooting at a steel plate and the sight was on the target when you decided to fire the gun and you missed, that's trigger. You have to know the difference. Anytime you're having and you guys that have been to class with me know, sight or trigger. It's both. Can't be both. No, it can't be both. Because if you honk the trigger with the dot not on the target, that's sight. If the sight's on the target when you decide to fire the gun and you miss, that's trigger. That means you moved the gun from an acceptable sight picture when you activated the trigger. You have to know which one it is. Shot calling is so great for that, by the way. Okay, page number 3. Now, how do we compare dry fire and live fire? It's extremely common for people to have a .9 acceptable sight picture and like a 1-2 first shot, 7 yards. And what I'm going to tell you, I've never discussed this on the podcast before. I'm only going to tell you guys because I trust you. I've got to trust you to use this information for good and not for evil. Okay? So here's what I'm going to tell you. When we're talking about the first shot, a predictive first shot can be helpful if we're trying to get under a second. Here's what that means. If you dry fire a significant amount, religiously, regularly, if you do it a lot, you know your sight is going to be in the middle of the target at the end of the draw stroke. So as an experiment, you can draw the gun, fire it at the end of the draw stroke, and watch it lift from the target instead of what we call over-confirming. What turns a 0.9 into a 1.2 is sight picture's good, I'm pretty sure it's good, yeah, it's good, let's shoot. A predictive first shot means firing at the end of the draw stroke, knowing the sight is going to be there because of a lot of dry fire, and watching it lift as the gun goes off, as opposed to taking a bunch of time to confirm it. I'm telling you, this is an extremely fine distinction. That's why I really hate to talk about it. It's much better to do on the range than it is on a podcast, but I do want to let you know that this is part of the reason for the gap. And if you have a double action gun, you seize ears, you need to be prepping that trigger on the way out of the holster. If you're not on that trigger until the gun's at the very end of the draw stroke, it's going to be tough to get under a second. I'm just telling you. Okay? We're doing reloads. My favorite way to measure reloads in live fire is to do one reload one with the timer already running. So that means you start the timer, so you don't need to react to it, aim at the target, and do one reload one, and then look at the split. The split is the reload. I find this to be much less likely to induce a lot of tension. We take the draw out, which means there's no grip issues to worry about. So one reload, one with the timer already running, is a great way to evaluate reloads. I like to do them pretty close. I personally don't see a reason to practice reloads at 15 yards. I like to do them really close because I want to learn what it feels like to load that gun as soon as I can. If you're talking about multiple shot drills, for example, I know that Refinement Repetition has a space to record live fire. I never did that. That wasn't something that I ever did. I put that in there because I thought people would want to do it. That's the only reason it's in there. You've got to be careful because the comparison is difficult and may be unnecessary if both times are dropping. For example, let's say your dry fire LPRES is 3 seconds, and you go out and do an LPRES in 3.5 with one mic. Is that good or bad? I personally would be overjoyed to do an LPRES in 3.5 seconds with only one mic. I'd be overjoyed. But most people can't handle that. Most people would go, see, this doesn't work. I can't go that fast. I would say, hallelujah. I just did this sucker in 3.5 seconds. Let's fix the mic. Because fixing the mic is so much easier than getting to 3.5 seconds on an LPRES. And the only bad shot is the uncalled shot. If you fire a poor shot in live fire and you know it was a miss, that's not an accuracy problem. That is a shot calling victory. And great care must be taken to acquire positive imprints during this process. Every thought you have while you are training is either increasing or decreasing your confidence. If you're going to the range and you're trying to get faster and you're imprinting, oh, bad shot, bad shot, bad shot, you're teaching yourself that fast shooting equals missing. That's what I'm practicing. It's not what you're practicing. What you're practicing is how to do things at a different limit of human function. There are going to be misses during this process. There are going to be poor shots during this process. It's inevitable. But if you want to get faster, you've got to push through that. That's all there is to it. You need to imprint, I'm getting faster and I'm learning to call my shots. Not, I'm going too fast and I'm missing. It's as simple as that. Now, what I really want to talk about is how to use both of them at the range. The practice that I do now is 100% in this environment, and I wish I had discovered it sooner. Here's what you're going to do. Warm up, don't warm up, that's up for you. That's up to you. If you like to warm up a little bit before you start shooting, be my guest. If you want to do it cold, that's also fine. It doesn't really matter that much to me. But what I want you to do is shoot something for score in match mode. Give yourself a walkthrough, give yourself double-digit reps, and shoot something in match mode. And then identify a hit factor goal that is reasonable for that day. Reasonable for that day. Something you think you can achieve that day. And then take that hit factor and convert it to a target time. What I like to do is whatever number of Charlies I think is going to be acceptable for something, I'll reduce those points. I'll take the number of points divided by my hit factor goal, and that's my time goal. Right? I'll give you an example. Let's say I want to do an El Pres at 11 hit factor, and it'd be 60 points. So I'm going to allow myself 4 Charlies. That's 8 points, so 52. So 52 is my number of points divided by 11. That gives me 4.72 to do an 11 hit factor El Pres with 4 Charlies. 4.72. That's my goal time. Okay? That seems awful low. Let's make it a 12. Allow myself 4 Charlies, 8 points divided by 12 hit factor. That gives me 433 for a 12 hit factor. That's how quickly I need to be able to do this with 4 Charlies to get a 12 hit factor. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry fire that significantly faster. And, it depends on the gun. It depends on the distance of the target. But let's say 20 to 30%. So let's say I'm trying to do a 4.3 El Pres. I'll take 25% off of that. Now I got to dry fire that at 3.22. Open would be a smaller percentage. Production or limited iron sights would probably be the highest percentage. Open PCC would be the lowest percentage because you get to keep more of the splits. Okay, so I'm going to dry fire that below my goal time, up 20 to 30%, until it's easy and the sight picture stabilize. And then I'm going to load the gun and I'm going to shoot it in speed mode, trying to get my speed under that 433 that I need. Don't really care about the hits right now. I really don't care. I'm just learning what does it feel like to operate this gun at my target time. That's what I'm trying to do. What does it feel like? Now, how much live fire you want to do in speed mode is totally up to you. That depends on your ammunition. I don't have a lot of ammo, so I do the vast majority of it in dry fire. What I would do is I would dry fire that sucker at 3.22 for about 10 minutes. I'd load the gun and shoot it, see what my time is. If I like the time, I might shoot it for score. If I don't like the time, I might dry fire it some more. But a little bit more live fire in speed mode is really good for the next step. Begin to call your shots in speed mode. You're not scoring or pasting the targets during this time, but you are beginning to call your shots. And you want to report a rough percentage of acceptable shots. What you don't want to do is say 2 mics. What you do want to say is 90% alphas. That's a much better number to report than 2 mics because you're controlling the imprint to your self-image. Hey, I've been at this 30 minutes. I'm at my target time with 90% alphas. That's great. And then at some point, you can shoot for score again. Now, shooting for score again is risky during a short period of time. And here's why. Using the El Pres as an example. If I do this for a short period of time and then I decide I'm going to shoot for score, one of 2 things is likely to happen. After a short period of practice, 45 minutes, 30 minutes, I'm very likely to hit my target time with some accuracy problems. I personally would call that a win. The other thing that could happen is I'm likely to have excellent accuracy and be away from my target time. I would also call that a win. Hey, I had great points. Most people would find the turd in that punch bowl and focus on that. But guys, if you could take a full second off of your El Pres with all alphas in 30 minutes, this information would be a lot more expensive. How much time it takes, it totally depends on the shooter, on the gun, and on the exercise. But this is the process I use for my personal practice. Okay? Now, if we're talking about movement in live fire, consider using steel. Once again, steel is great for movement exercises because the accuracy is pass-fail. You don't have to worry about what a delta does to a time game. We learn instant makeups when we use steel. We get increased confidence on entering and leaving steel, which a lot of people are not too happy about. And you can learn what a hit and a miss looks like as the gun goes off. This is something I've been doing in live fire classes, and I want you guys to go out and try this. You'll either think it's brilliant or it's stupid. And I want you to aim at a piece of steel, shoot it, and watch the sight lift off of it. Okay? That's what a hit looks like. Now I want you to aim off into the berm and shoot an intentional miss. What does that look like? Well, when the sight lifted, there was no steel behind it. Okay, that's great. Now we know what a hit looks like, and we know what a miss looks like. If we know those two things, we have learned to call our shots on steel, and we don't need to listen for a ding. We don't need to watch them fall. If we know what a hit looks like and a miss looks like. Brilliant or stupid, brilliant or stupid, brilliant or stupid. Trust me, it's brilliant. The only reason you thought, oh, hey, the pod daughter's home. You want to come say hi to YouTube? She spends all her time on YouTube, so might as well say hi. Hello, pod daughter. How was school?
It was good.
All right. How's your loser too-old boyfriend?
Good.
Did you dump him yet?
No.
Ah, it's too bad. We'll keep working on that.
No.
We got to get this thing done before prom time. We got to get this dumping happen way before prom.
No.
Got to get this 17-year-old loser off the radar.
No.
We got to just get him out of here.
No.
It's going to be time for a Reggie.
No. Okay, that's fine.
You fight?
Yeah.
All I want to know is, can fight?
Yes.
Somebody might say something. Can't fight. She can't go. Bad Boys 2, Reggie, is coming very, very soon. All right, so final point. If you're going to use dry fire and live fire together, you need to have a stated goal. That's incredibly important, is to have a stated goal. Shoot it for score, identify a goal, and then achieve it. Great care must be taken to provide positive imprints during all of these processes. The imprints are the thoughts that you have about how this is going, your perception of whether you're improving or not, and in general, how you feel about what is happening. If you focus on the potential negatives, you will be damaging self-image, damaging confidence, damaging performance. Well, you're telling me to ignore the misses. Kind of. What I'm telling you is, if you're trying to get significantly quicker in a short period of time, there are going to be bad shots. That means you're learning. That means you're getting faster. And if you know whether it was sight or trigger, now you're really learning. Now you're really getting faster. But confidence can only come from past success predicting future success. And if you don't define success in your practice and your training, it can never be achieved, which means you'll never expect it. This means you'll be accustomed to failing during training. You'll be accustomed to failing during shooting. You'll be accustomed to failing during competition. It's not what you want, but boy, you're sure becoming an expert in it. Confidence comes from being accustomed to success, and that comes from defining success in a reasonable manner for that day. Right? Here's what I did for score. Here's what I'm pretty sure I can do. Let's go to work and get her done. Okay? But if we don't have success, and we don't identify and acknowledge success, we will always leave the range feeling unsuccessful. And folks, if you leave the range feeling unsuccessful, you will arrive at the range in that exact same state. You always arrive at the range in the same condition you left it last time. So take care of that condition. All right, that does it for today. We'll get these show notes up on the insider side for you insiders. And until we meet again on the range or anywhere else, be like me, do what I do, say it with me. 1, 2, 3. That's a nice beep. Get to work.